All right, and we are live. So, what a great year for combat sports. And unfortunately, that great year did not involve the likes of Conor McGregor. And reason being, we're going to go into that, but we're also going to go into all the details of this year's combat sports that encompass everything from boxing to MMA. We can literally go through the list of all the great things that have happened all throughout this year, all the amazing results that we would have never expected to have happened. For example, who would have thought Sean Strickland was going to beat Israel Adesanya, and then for Dricus du Plessis to go out and knock out Robert Whitaker, only for Israel Adesanya to go in the cage, confront Dricus du Plessis, and by the way, said some very racially derogatory comments towards him. And not only that, to the point where literally it was setting up ourselves up for a big event and a big fight that could potentially have happened in Sydney with Dricus du Plessis taking on Sean Strickland. Now, that's not what had happened because Izzy is in this career trajectory where he was taking fights almost every other month. And here he is, Sean Strickland stepped up to the plate. He was very active that year of 2023 and then was active in the previous year. So they set him up for that fight. And Izzy even promised to the UFC that, you know what? I'm going to win this fight. You guys don't need to worry. You've got a matchup ahead for Dricus du Plessis for me to take on later. I'm just going to use Sean Strickland as some sort of tune-up. Lo and behold, what happens? It is now Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland headlining in the beginning of the year. And what about Alex Pereira? He gets knocked out in the beginning of the year against Israel Adesanya for Israel Adesanya to avenge his loss, only for him to come back, beat Yuri Prochazka, and become a two-time two-weight UFC world champion, which, by the way, is part of a very elite small club of fighters that were able to accomplish this. How about some knockouts of the year with Josh Emmett and Bryce Mitchell? Now, that right there was scary to the point where Bryce Mitchell was curling up. So that's something to take into consideration that could potentially go down as a knockout of the year. Now, I want you guys to understand, full disclosure, there is a lot of content to go through over the 2023 course, of which I can't possibly do because I just don't have the bandwidth to really go back to every single fight that had happened from boxing to MMA. But I'm going to highlight to you the ones that I've looked at and the ones that I've highlighted in my mind and everything else that I thought was important to talk about. And of course, there are other channels out there that are going to fill in those missing pieces. I don't have to be that guy that has to be the combat sports encyclopedia, even though I do know a lot of knowledge in the game, just like anybody else that would do MMA content or combat sports content of that nature, right? But we're going to go through a lot of the things that I thought was really important to take a look at, such as this Bryce Mitchell knockout, which, again, maybe I'm a little bit biased because Josh Emmett is a team alpha male guy out here in Sacramento, and being that, well, in my opinion, he's probably one of the best 145 fighters in the world. And on top of that, I mean, let's just be honest. Objectively speaking, that knockout was very scary, and you can't dispute that. And then you have in boxing, Terrence Crawford finally fights Errol Spence Jr., a long-awaited match that we've been wanting to see for a couple of years now, and here we are. They finally met, only for Terrence Crawford to absolutely dominate him to the point where it just wasn't a fair fight for Errol Spence at all. And it didn't look like the 50-50 matchup that we had expected this fight to be, in the ways that we always sort of make these matchups and say to ourselves, you know what? This is going to be the greatest matchup of all time. It's going to go the distance. They're going to give each other a good account of themselves, just like what we thought what would have happened with Ricky Hatton and Floyd Mayweather from back in the days. Obviously, it came out the way that it did with the results that it had gone through. Of course, Ricky Hatton gave a good account of himself, but got finished ultimately, which isn't something that you would expect out of a 50-50 fight with two highly elite boxers. And this is sort of what you would have expected in the Errol Spence Terrence Crawford fight. But in reality, what happened? Well, here we are. We have Errol Spence Jr. really getting battered to the point where we just couldn't believe it. Now, what about with the likes of Francis Ngannou taking on Tyson Fury? Another fight in 2023 that we didn't expect to happen. And it did. Tyson Fury won that fight, scathed through, now has a matchup for an undisputed belt against Alexander Usyk to unify all those belts all together. And now here's Francis Ngannou, fresh out of MMA, fresh out of being a UFC champion, basically not cut, but released from the UFC based on the fact that he didn't sign a contract negotiation with them after his contract had run out with the Cyril Gane fight. And now here he is as a first-time boxer, now ranked in the WBC and among other boxing rankings and sanctioning bodies based on his performance against Tyson Fury. Made a real good account of himself, which made this year just great in and of itself for both MMA and boxing. And then you have the fights that sort of connect Francis Ngannou to all of that, which is Tom Aspinall knocking out Sergey Pavlovich, and then you had John Jones submitting Cyril Gane in the first round very easily. So you have Tom Aspinall, who's a submission artist, and then you have John Jones, who's one of the greatest mixed martial arts fighters of all time, if not the greatest, submitting Cyril Gane. And then here comes Tom Aspinall with the greatest knockout power currently in the heavyweight division, because he's proven it time and time again. He can knock guys out. He can submit guys. Now we have a disputed belt in terms of who is the real undisputed champion. Obviously, John Jones is crowned the undisputed champion right now. Rightfully so, he's earned it, but it's almost like the UFC's PR campaign wanted to bring John Jones into the heavyweight division so that they can somehow leave Francis Ngannou out and have him forgotten. Also highlight all of his deficiencies in terms of skill, in terms of being a champion, in terms of marketability, and highlighting all these things in order to basically create order in the UFC. And now creating even more disorder because you have an interim champion, and then you have John Jones as the undisputed champion, and they both finished their fights in the first round impressively, and yet have to fight each other because John Jones had to pull out in the Stipe Miocic fight, which was not too long ago at UFC 295. The same card that obviously Tom Aspinall had become interim champion in. So there's a lot of things to really dispute in this particular division based on Francis Ngannou's departure alone. And then add to the fact that Francis Ngannou is now in the boxing scene and is ranked highly in that particular sanctioning bodies of the WBC and among other sanctioning bodies, which again created all this confusion that you sort of never really needed in the heavyweight division. But it's how the game goes. Guys don't always re-sign. This is the reality of the game, but that's what it is. And then on top of that, you have here Amanda Nunes retiring at UFC 289 back in Vancouver, beating Aldana for her 135-pound strap. And then, of course, how about Robbie Lawler going out on top with a knockout win the way that he was able to perform against Price back in UFC 290 in the summertime of this year. Probably one of the greatest summers of UFC's history, just based on the UFC 290 card alone. And then you have, for this year, a very disputed boxing fighter of the year on the male side. You have Devin Haney. You got Gervonta Tank Davis, who, by the way, during this year defeated Ryan Garcia, and then Ryan Garcia came back not too long ago, around this month. And then you have Inoue, who just had that knockout against Tapales. Now you have Terrence Crawford, who had the biggest win of them all. However, only one fight throughout the whole entire year. So it's very disputed. But make no mistake, in the MMA side, the men's fighter of the year is none other than Islam Makhachev. And on top of that, him and Volkanovski fought twice, and one of them, the first time back in February, was fight of the year. And then for Islam Makhachev to come back in UFC Abu Dhabi to get knocked out by a head kick from Islam Makhachev, only for Islam Makhachev to show his evolving game. So it sort of is fitting that he is the men's fighter of the year. He comes in there against Volkanovski, another world champion at a lower weight class, but a very elite one at that, gives Islam Makhachev one of the toughest 5-round fights of his life. And then only to come back at a rematch because Oliveira couldn't make it based on an injury. He steps in at 11 days' notice. Of course, you can always highlight that the same way that you can highlight Bryce Mitchell coming in on a few days' notice. But a knockout is a knockout, in history. We'll always remember that particular result, no matter the asterisk involved. So that's what you have for 2023 as a whole. Now, let's get to the main event of this whole entire content that I think is really important to highlight. Why Conor McGregor is not fighting. And there's several reasons why. If you look in the description of this particular content, I'm showing you exactly why that is. There's a couple of reasons that I had highlighted. Let's take a look at them. Okay. First and foremost, number one, by the way, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe as I work hard for you guys to bring you the best content in MMA, boxing, and all of combat sports. So, number one, the UFC may not be able to afford Conor McGregor. And by the way, Sean O'Malley is credited for saying this. So I urge you guys to take a look at his podcast. I haven't actually seen that podcast yet, but it is interesting to note why O'Malley would say that, but I could probably have a few speculations as to why. Number two, the UFC behind the scenes may know about his alleged drug habits, which, by the way, is very important to understand because they don't want to risk the fact that, well, guess what? They have some sort of issues with Conor McGregor behind the scenes, not being able to train properly, not having the right camp, and you wonder what kind of shape he's going to be in. Because a couple of months ago, maybe even a couple of years ago, Khabib had said something about Conor McGregor that I think is really fitting to understand, and probably something that you guys have to study from years on out in order for you to really grasp that statement, which is something to the effect of Conor McGregor is going to be used by the UFC. They're going to use him as a cash cow. They're going to get him to fight some of the top guys coming up, build names off of him the way that they built names off of Dustin Poirier, the way that they built names off of Khabib Nurmagomedov. And then even with a loss from Cowboy Cerrone, he sort of built a bigger name for himself after that first round knockout loss that he suffered against McGregor. Nonetheless, they're using McGregor to build him up. They know that Conor McGregor, at least in Khabib's words, he said that he is a lion when he comes up with, let's say, less competition, right? But if he goes up against the beasts of, let's say, the top 5 or the championship caliber fighters that you have, perhaps maybe that isn't the case for Conor McGregor. And even Lucas Tracy MMA, by the way, one of the up and coming YouTube channels, one of the big ones now that's in the YouTube space, he mentioned something to the effect where he doesn't even believe that Conor McGregor could probably beat any of the top 15 guys, which, by the way, is insane to think. Conor McGregor is ranked somewhere in number 9 in the UFC's rankings. Now, I'm not quite sure about that, but we can try to take a look and see if that's some sort of reality. Let's see what is the UFC rankings right now. And then I will highlight for you in this particular moment what are their rankings. So let's take a look at this. Okay. So now we have Islam Makhachev as the pound for pound number 1 guy right now, right in the rankings. Number 2 is John Jones. Number 3 is Alexander Volkanovski. And 4 is Leon Edwards. But let's take a look at the 155 division. So Conor McGregor is not even on this list currently, is he? There's Charles Oliveira at number 1, Islam sitting on top, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Armin Sarukian, number 4. How about that? Number 4 already. I guess that's because of the Beneil Dariush win that he had. Mateus Gamrot right there next to Michael Chandler, Beneil Dariush, Rafael Fiziev, Dan Hooker, Jalen Turner at number 10. Perfect. That is a perfect case right there. Rafael Dos Santos at number 11. Benoit Saint Denis. By the way, he had some oppressive knockouts all throughout the year this year. Renato Macano, Bobby Green at number 14, and then Drew Dober at number 15. So there is no Conor McGregor in this particular lightweight ranking, which I think is quite interesting to really point out, because it wasn't too long ago that I had just seen Conor McGregor as the, what is this, number 9, I believe, which, by the way, surprised me in and of itself, considering the fact that this guy was so high on the list of, let's say, pound for pound rankings back in 2016, double champion. And then after he came back from the Floyd Mayweather fight, all of a sudden, here he is. He's back down to being an lineal champion rather than, let's say, the reigning champion, and then fights Khabib, loses, comes back to fight Donald Cerrone, wins, and then comes back and fights Dustin Poirier twice, by the way, and gets a leg injury in the second time around after he had got knocked out in Abu Dhabi, only to get his leg snapped in Vegas. And this is the picture that you see right here with Conor McGregor. Then he comes out with the McGregor Forever documentary, which I think is quite fascinating because it was an absolute PR campaign in order for him to stay relevant. When was the last time Conor McGregor fought? We're talking about 2021. Now it's 2023, now going into 2024, and time is not on his side. Time is ticking down. We are at a point right now where Conor McGregor is literally wasting his prime away. Now, that's all right if, let's say, you're a regional fighter or if you're an amateur fighter and you had 1 or 2 fights and then you just decided to hang it up, or you just decided to take big breaks in between and then maybe come back when you're in your mid-30s or something like that. But this is Conor McGregor we're talking about. We're talking about a guy who is a serious cash cow in the industry. And why is he not coming back? Is Sean O'Malley correct about his assessment of the UFC not being able to afford him? Well, let's take a look at that from different perspectives to really understand the full grasp of what Sean O'Malley means by that. And from the business side, let's really understand what that is. So the UFC knows that Conor McGregor is a very expensive commodity. He has generated the most numbers in mixed martial arts, if not all of combat sports. You look at his fight with Floyd Mayweather, he probably makes checks till this day based on that fight. I definitely know Floyd Mayweather still does. we're talking about royalties and whatnot. So this man is set for life. He sold Proper 12. He's got a few businesses on the side. I believe he's also the co-owner of Paradigm Sports Management with El-Kheer out in LA. By the way, one of the most famous Arab American sports agents in the United States, representing Conor McGregor and among other top elite athletes across all sports, NFL, NHL, NBA, etc., etc. Even Tony Ferguson was part of that camp at some point. And then, of course, he departed based on the fact that, well, it was a conflict of interest being a part of that crew because Conor McGregor was basically the man writing the checks for that entire company and damn near the co-owner of Paradigm Sports. Nonetheless, this is what we have going on with Conor McGregor in his particular state of mind, right? So is he hard to afford for the UFC? Probably, because the UFC does not know if, let's say, he goes into a fight with Michael Chandler, what is the interest behind that? We honestly don't know. We can say that he is going to be a top pay-per-view draw, but we are now living in the world of streaming, in the world of internet savvy kids, where every year, I want you to put this in perspective, right? Because as somebody like myself who has graduated in, let's say, 2004, this is one concept that I have a hard time grasping. Ever since 2004, every year, there are new high schoolers that are graduating. Next thing you know, now it's the class of 2005. And the next thing you know, it was a class of 2006. And the next thing you know, it was a class of 2007, bumping, what's his name? Soldier Boy with that Superman song. By the way, a song that was featured in one of the first MMA movies back in 2007, which was Never Back Down. 2008, and then 2009, 2010, so on and so forth. 2011, now it's 2024. Every year, there's new high schoolers that are graduating high school, and then you just get older and older, and then the world gets even more savvier and savvier with the internet and becoming a lot more computer literate, as opposed to, let's say, the boomers in the past that don't have that same skill or don't have that same understanding of the internet world and how to, let's say, stream free fights and whatnot. So we don't know if Conor McGregor is still a draw in this particular current time that we are living in. And that is something we really have to understand when the UFC is behind the scenes trying to figure out what they're trying to do. They're trying to navigate, hey, what if we put him in Vegas? The one that just passed recently in UFC 296. What if we put him there? Nah, let's not put him there. It may not be such a big draw. Well, why not? Well, because this is the numbers that we saw, the analytics that we saw come in. It's going to be the holidays. It's going to be hard for people to cough up $80 to put Conor McGregor in a card, because obviously people want to buy gifts for the holidays. People want to buy stuff for New Year's and this and that. So they're competing with that. Okay, let's scratch that. Let's not put him in a December card. How about somewhere down the road? How about UFC 300? That's a big one. All right, how are we going to do that? What are we going to do in terms of getting Conor in that card, but also getting Conor in that card with other superstars that may be as equally expensive, and perhaps maybe at a point where we may not be able to generate back that kind of money. So there's a lot of risk assessments involved going on. So again, maybe Sean O'Malley has something in terms of what he means when the UFC may not be able to afford him. But again, I urge you guys to take a look at his podcast and see what he says. I have yet to take a look at it. I will probably watch it sometime tonight or maybe tomorrow, and perhaps maybe make a video out of it to sort of understand what it is that he knows or what it is that he tries to convey. Here's what I do know. Aljamain Sterling made fun of his last opponent, which was none other than Sean O'Malley, saying that he's not really a big pay-per-view star because our numbers tanked when me and him fought. Okay, but Aljo, you are the champion. You're the one that's supposed to be the A side. But obviously, we understand in combat sports that being the A side or being the guy that, let's say, is, well, how do I say this? The guy that is not the champion can sometimes be the A side in both boxing and MMA. And that's the reality that we have to face sometimes, right? So, again, these speculations have some merit to them. Now, how about some other speculations as to why he's not fighting? So, behind the scenes, we mentioned about the drug habits that he may have allegedly had that makes the UFC look at and say, well, I don't know if we want to invest in any of this right now, right? It may not be such a good idea. How about the number three reason? Legal issues that people may not know about. And by the way, this is always prevalent in Ireland due to Ireland's laws that prevent public information towards an ongoing criminal case. Now, obviously, if Conor McGregor was to commit a crime here in the United States, you will hear about it, you will know about it, you will get his mug shot and all, and that's just the reality of this country. But in Ireland, they have a different reality, which is based on that, well, if there's a case going on, they don't want to reveal who is the defendant and who is the victim based on privacy reasons. And again, there's some there's some positivity out of that. Why? Because let's take a look at it like this, right? Do you really want people who are accused of something that never really did anything for people to say, oh, you know what? This person is bad because he was accused of this. Again, in America, you are innocent until proven guilty. But guess what? The media has something else to say. OJ Simpson gets acquitted from his trial. Guess what? We all know, or at least we think we know what happened because the evidence seems so damning. But at the same time, he has such great lawyers that he was able to defeat that case. Same thing with Snoop Dogg when he beat his murder trial back in the early 90s or the mid 90s at that. So with Conor McGregor, he's had a few run ins with the law. Even in Ireland, he's gotten in trouble a few times where he was brandishing Mac 11 uh, guns in his social media while he was driving around in his Ferrari or his Lamborghini, one of those cars that he had. And so the Irish government came and basically tried to lay down the law on him on that. But we never really heard too much about it. There were a few rumblings online talking about it, but there wasn't a clear story or a clear situation to really look at and say, okay, well, this is the rap sheet, this is the paperwork, these are the mug shots. We never got anything out of it. And then you take a look at the incidents that he's had in the yacht where he threw that girl out of the yacht, which I believe was allegedly his old classmate, someone that was a little bit older than him, but now is calling, let's say, the Irish government or uh, telling the Spanish police. She didn't tell the Spanish police when she was there, but then she went and told the Irish police when she got back home. So again, there may be some criminal investigations going on with the Garda and the Irish police forces that we may not know about based on the laws that they have. So, what came out of that court case? We don't know because they don't reveal anything that goes on in Ireland. It's part of their laws over there. So, that's something to keep in mind. Among other incidents that he's had going on, how about the situation that he had with the DJ Falconetti from Italy, which, by the way, a friend of mine, Eric Trilogy, was out with Conor McGregor in Rome when that incident happened. And I had actually talked with him about that. So I asked Eric, I was like, what happened with Conor McGregor and DJ Falconetti? I know it sounds like I'm cursing and whatnot, right? But again, that's his name. That's a very prominent Italian name. What are you going to do? His name is DJ Falconetti. DJ Falconetti. Hey, DJ Falconetti. Hey, what are you doing? Okay, so I asked Eric, what's going on, Eric? What happened with this guy? What had gone on? Did Conor McGregor really punched this guy for no reason. So I told Eric, I was like, you know what? Maybe it's just one of those situations where you know how Italian guys are. Us Middle Eastern guys are the same way. We're very rough, aggressive, and aggro. You get a group of us guys together. Next thing you know, we're wrist locking each other. Next thing you know, we're trying moves on each other. Next thing you know, we're throwing fake punches at each other or this and that. We just we just don't know what happened there, right? But given the baseline of how we understand Italian guys to be, and again, it's not a knock on no Italians or anything like that. It's just, look, let's just be real, right? We're very aggressive dudes, right? Middle Easterners, Italians, Greeks, even the Chechens. These guys are all the same. They're very aggressive type of dudes. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is, it's problematic when you have Conor McGregor, who's probably high off his mind, thinking, what is this guy doing? And then out of nowhere, he goes and he reacts. That could have been the reason. Nonetheless, these are all speculations. We don't know. These are all alleged, but it is plausible to take a look at and say, hey, you know what? Maybe it has something to do with ongoing criminal cases that we don't know about, and the UFC wants to hide it under the table. And you also have to remember, from a public relations point of view, this is something they're going to hide and sweep under the rug in order for people to be in the dark about it and in order for the UFC to maintain their face. So it's something to think about. Also, how about this? He may just potentially retire and just keep it on the down low. Similar to old school UFC vet Sean Sherk. If you guys remember who Sean Sherk was, he was one of the old school guys in the UFC, right? He just retired literally out of nowhere. He was a guy that fought BJ Penn and was known for BJ Penn basically kneeing him in the head, right? If you guys don't remember, that's this is Sean Sherk right here, right? He was one of the biggest 155 fighters in the UFC. He was actually a former 155 champion, right? Let's take a look at his career, right? He's obviously had some steroid accusations all throughout the years. If you've ever seen this guy train, it was just an absolute freak show of a circuit that he had going on. He had some great circuits going on where he would do climbs, where he would do, let's say, like functional patterns that had to deal with mixed martial arts, this 25-minute circuit that he was doing. So it's something worth to look at. I mean, the guy was just an absolute beast. Nonetheless, he had a great career. Former two-time UFC lightweight champion, also competed in Pride on top of that. His last fight was against Evan Dunham, who, by the way, I know Evan Dunham because he fought Dustin Akbari, one of my former grappling coaches out here in Team Alpha Male. That was one of Dustin Akbari's most notable fights, right? And then he had lost, and then obviously that put Dustin Akbari back to the world of jiu-jitsu, just concentrating on that, not really concentrating on MMA. But nonetheless, the last fight of Sean Sherk was in 2010, almost like a decade ago. I mean, not almost, that's literally 13 or 14 years ago now. Okay, it was fight of the night. He won by split decision against Evan Dunham. And then out of nowhere, he just retired and nobody even knew about it. But the difference is, you got to understand, back in the days, Sean Sherk, as opposed to the Conor McGregor era, it's a completely different era, right? Because you can retire off into the sunset quietly without anyone knowing. Next thing you know, it was September 2010 when he won that fight, right? Now it's November 2010. Next thing you know, it's December. Now it's 2011. And then now it's in the early parts of 2011. Next thing you know, now you hear in mid 2011 that he has retired. In the earlier days of when Ariel Helwani was doing his shows and whatnot, he interviewed him and then he just came out of nowhere and said, yeah, I retired. I just didn't want to really say anything or make a big fuss about it. Now, Conor McGregor, it's hard for him to do that because of the high notoriety that he has. I mean, you see him everywhere. He stays relevant, even if he's not fighting. If he's not fighting, he's going to fights. He's going to drink and do drugs while he's in these events, or he'll be at home doing drugs and drinking while he's tweeting about it, talking trash to the fighters that are currently fighting in that particular night that he's watching, or praising them. So he is constantly in the news, he is constantly in the social media cycles, and he is constantly making appearances in big fighting events. Just like the Day of Reckoning card, he was there. Just like the Anthony Joshua card against Robert Helenius, he was there in London. And just like the Tyson Fury fight, he was there. He was in all the fights. So again, if Conor McGregor was to go out like Sean Sherk in a way where he retired gracefully or retired in a very quiet manner, it would be very hard because of the notoriety, the businesses that he's had, and the media appearances that Conor McGregor is constantly a part of. So that right there would be very surprising if he just retired and didn't really say anything. Now, how about this? Potential political ambitions on becoming Ireland's all-time youngest head of state. By the way, I want you guys to know that there was this incident recently in Ireland. For those of you that don't know, I made a video about it. Okay, I'm going to play you the video right now so I can kind of give you some context as to what had gone on in terms of Connor's problems in Ireland, which I think is really important to highlight and take a look at. Okay, let's go into the video section and play this video of Conor McGregor. By the way, this was 1 month ago. So the title of this is Conor McGregor and Tommy Robinson. Why? Because Conor McGregor is being compared to a Tommy Robinson, and now possibly a potential political figure. Imagine if Conor McGregor actually became the prime minister or the head of state of Ireland. Imagine what kind of meetings he would have with Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden would probably try to touch him in some very inappropriate ways, probably try to hug him and say, "Hey, Conor, did you know that I have Irish ancestry? Do you want to see my hairy legs? Maybe they have a little bit of ginger in them to show you my Irish side, huh?" Anyways, here's Conor McGregor and the Tommy Robinson video that I had made to give you guys some context. Any of this, not that initially there would have any evidence to indicate he. The first time I heard about the riots that were going on in Dublin, automatically I thought to myself, how is Conor McGregor involved in any of this? Not that initially there would have any evidence to indicate he was involved in this in any kind of capacity. But the fact that, yes, it is Irish related, it does deal with, let's say, things that are going on in Ireland. I said to myself, you know what? Maybe there's a chance. And then lo and behold, guess what happens? They charge Conor McGregor with incitement just based on the fact that, well, let's say there was this migrant from the Slavic region that had been living in Dublin for some odd years now, maybe even a decade or so, from according to the reports that were being mentioned. And the unfortunate thing about that is the reason of, well, unfortunately, somebody got taken out in a very negative and a very brutal fashion, right? And we're talking like with a knife, we're talking things that involve gruesome details, basically a school teacher nonetheless. So what does Conor McGregor do as in response to any of this? He goes and says something to the extent, and you guys can look it up. He has it on his Twitter, and if he has deleted it based on the fact that he's being investigated by the Irish government, the Garda, for incitement, well, you can probably find it somewhere online with people screenshotting it. But basically something along the lines where we're at war because of this thing that is going on, and this is a prevalent mindset that a lot of people in the Western European world are feeling. Not so much with Ireland. Why? Because, for one, you got to understand Ireland was a country that fought an imperialist nation such as Great Britain. And because of that, they sort of gained what you would call a little bit of, let's say, a liberal leaning stance when it came to, let's say, immigration, which is why Ireland is very prominent in allowing a lot of immigrants to come to their country, and to even their own detriment from what is happening right now. The simple fact that, well, they don't have to work, there's no incentive to work, and we don't even understand or know the reason behind why this Slavic man decided to go out and kill a teacher. Nonetheless, it was enough for a lot of people to be very upset. And then on top of that, you have people that are, let's say, in the right wing space that are saying something to the extent, well, you know what? They are worried about this, but they're not worried about the actual killer, meaning they're worried about what Conor McGregor is saying and how they're going to try to tie him into some kind of incitement when they're not even worried about the killer. Well, the unfortunate thing that I have to say about that, in all objectivity, is the false equivalence that comes with that. For one, of course, this man is going to get arrested. There's nowhere in the world where you can just go and kill somebody, unless, of course, it has something to do with extrajudicial, let's say, covert ops missions and whatnot. But you can't get away with murder in any society. They're going to lock you up, and so they did. I'm sure this man has been locked up. Now, the punishment obviously is going to be debatable, whether he gets life or whether he gets prison, and all of that is a variation, and really is just really dependent upon which state has certain types of laws that will dictate what the punishment may be. Now, with that said, with the false equivalence, something that you guys have to understand with this Conor McGregor situation, right? Over the years, I've noticed that Conor McGregor, well, let's just say he was a little bit left leaning. And this is my own observation. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, if you've noticed things different about Conor McGregor in, let's say, the earlier times, let's say around 2014 or so, right? What was Conor McGregor known for in Ireland? I'll tell you. He was a big proponent in legalizing gay marriages in Ireland, which is important to understand to sort of grasp where his mental mindset was at politically during that time when he was just coming up. Okay. Also, you got to take into consideration he's gotten a few, let's say, back and forths with Donald Trump. If you guys don't remember, back in 2015, before Donald Trump became the U.S. president, Donald Trump made fun of Ronda Rousey for getting knocked out. And Conor McGregor, of course, came to his defense saying, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not a fighter or this and that. You're just a big mouth. Basically slagging off Trump in defense of Ronda Rousey, because Donald Trump said that he was glad she lost because she wasn't a very nice person. And I think a lot of that had to deal with the fact that Ronda Rousey at the time was a Bernie Sanders supporter. And Bernie Sanders was, well, a pretty big opponent for Trump, if not the entire Democratic establishment that wanted to, let's say, get a Democrat president in office at the time, which obviously backfired because Trump ended up winning. And yeah, that's neither here or there. But the point of the matter is, this is where Conor McGregor was in his political ethos at the time. So what is significant about this? I got to tell you, I've always mentioned and claimed that Conor McGregor was a big proponent and a big contributor in bringing the hip-hop culture to mixed martial arts. I've said this over and over and over again, probably more so than, let's say, any African-American fighters or any British African fighters or any fighter that comes from any, let's say, urban community of some sort. That and Nate Diaz, which obviously is sort of the reason why the fight between him and Nate Diaz was as big as it was, because it attracted a multitude of different audiences, and some of those were crossovers or somehow lapovers with Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor fans that come from the hip-hop community. So, in other words, let's just try to understand this in perspective. Would you say that the hip-hop community sort of leans a little bit left? right? At least for the vast majority of them. If you remember Nipsey Hussle, one of the biggest artists to come out of California, by the way, from Slauson down in LA, he had a song in 2016 before he died called F Donald Trump, right? And guess what? A lot of people were down with this song. A lot of people in the hood were bumping this song. And from the time that I remember, even this song was played in Conor McGregor's after party in New York after he had beaten Eddie Alvarez. So you see the picture that I'm kind of painting here, right? Well, let's go even further with that. The other picture that I'm trying to paint, and something that I need you guys to understand, is that there are people, let's say, that are within the hip hop community, like, well, he's not necessarily in a hip hop community. He sort of played a character, but I'm talking about John Cena. Let's talk about him, right? If you notice earlier in his career, okay, the guy was sort of a hip hop aficionado, a freestyler. At the time when John Cena came out, the movie 8 Mile was hot. And he was a battle rapper, and so he ran with the whole entire gimmick. And guess what? It made the John Cena that we see today. But over the years, as you notice, John Cena sort of started developing a little bit more of a conservative, pro-military, pro-America type of persona to him, but still kept a little bit of that essence of his hip-hop mojo that he developed in his early career. Well, guess what? I think that's really interesting to point out, because a lot of guys that I know that come from the hood sort of, well, they're not rappers, they're not famous fighters, they're not famous entertainers, but guess what? They all deal with the same transition within their lives. I've known plenty of guys that have spent time in prison, that have lived that life of crime, and then when they came out, they were staunch conservatives, Trump supporters, or just maybe overall conservative, not necessarily Trump or Republican centric to any degree, but within that same way of thinking. Another guy that I knew that was like that, a guy who, by the way, I've been a feature of in his show. His name is Matt Spear, right? He was a former Navy intelligence guy, right? Very fascinating character. And I was very privileged enough to be part of his show one time, to call in, to be part of a guest, to talk several times, maybe about twice or maybe 3 times I have. One of them was a phone call. But one of the things that I find fascinating about Matt is that he has a show called Don't Unfriend Me, right? And it's a great concept because, again, it really deals a lot with, let's say, people having differing opinions and differing worldviews, but with the theme of saying, hey, you know what? Don't unfriend me. We may think differently. Maybe there's some things that we can come down the line and say, you know what? We have something more in common than we do the opposite. Okay, that's literally the theme of the show. But what's interesting about him, aside from the fact that he's a former Navy guy, aside from the fact that he's a former Californian who now lives in Colorado and has had these corporate jobs with Comcast and Apple and things of that nature, was that he also grew up in the Ventura area. And even in one of his shows, I remember he said that he's been around gangs before. He is no stranger to the culture of the Northaniels, to the culture of the Bloods and Crips. And yet, you look at this guy, he is a staunch conservative. He is pro-America. He cares about the borders of America, which, by the way, is very important to understand this particular content. Because guess what? What was Conor McGregor fighting for in terms of what he was tweeting about, or what the Irish government was trying to hone down on him as some sort of incitement, which is what? Telling the Irish people, you know what, you guys need to go out there and protect yourselves, maintain safety, maintain vigilance, but also, he also sort of condemned the violence, which you sort of have to, right? Now that they're trying to crack down on him. Well, now, the other unfortunate thing about this is there are no arrests being made with Conor McGregor yet, right? However, what they are trying to do, as they are currently investigating him, Ireland, what they're trying to do is create laws that sort of prohibit certain speeches on the internet. Now, why is this significant to try to understand? Because right now there's no crime. But later down the road, as they're investigating and as they're trying to put these bills through and these laws passed guess what? It may change somewhere down the road. And then here's the other insane kicker of it all. Conor McGregor has mentioned he wanted to run for prime minister or president of Ireland. Now, why is that significant? Because guess what? What's going on with Donald Trump right now? Well, I can tell you that he wants to run for president again. He wants to become the biggest son of a gun of them all. Why do I say he wants to be the biggest son of a gun of them all? Because he's already number 45, and he wants to become number 47 after he beats the number 46 Joe Biden, if and when he does, which, by the way, is highly debatable at this point based on the criminal charges they bring against him. Which brings me to my point. This is the reason why Conor McGregor has an issue in his hands with the Irish government. Because the Irish government knows that he wants to run things, wants to change whatever it is that he wants to change in terms of policies, domestic and foreign, when it comes to Irish politics. And guess what? The establishment is going to have a serious problem with that. And I'm going to tell you why. Conor McGregor comes from a working class background. And for those of you that don't understand about Irish society, they look down on the working class. And I'm talking about the middle class to higher elites of that society. Why? Because let's face it, the working class have a very hard life in that particular part of the world, not just Ireland, but also the UK and the entire British Isles period, right? They just have a completely different society than we do here in America. So as a result of that, guess what? A lot of these young men who come from these working class backgrounds, guys that are plumbers, guys that are construction workers, guys that, let's say, do, I don't know, labor jobs of some sort, right? Many of these guys turn to a life of crime in order to sustain a certain type of living or to maybe move themselves up to another class of, let's say, tax bracket of some sort or lack of tax bracket, but that's neither here or there. But either way, they are demonized because of that. And this is also the reason why, believe it or not, mixed martial arts, for as popular as Conor made it, is not as followed by, let's say, their mainstream media. And why is that? Well, for one reason or another, perhaps maybe you could say that the Irish have a lot of different sports. Not really, not as much as we Americans have. Or do we have, let's say, more, yeah, we definitely have more sports here, right? For you to not cover MMA. But then, yeah, you look at MMA here in America. Yeah, it's nowhere near what you have with, let's say, hockey, baseball, or the other sports, right? If, in fact, MMA is a baby when it comes to that. But you would think in Ireland, what do they have? They have Gaelic football, which is a form of rugby, and then they have rugby, and then they have soccer, which is English football. And then that's basically it. And then maybe a few Irish people follow the NFL here and there with whatever TV deals that the NFL has going on in that side of the world. That's about it. That's all that you have. Either way, they should be covering mixed martial arts more often based on the fact that, well, Conor McGregor really made the sport a whole lot bigger than what people would have ever imagined it to be. Now, why is it not? Well, it's the simple fact that Conor McGregor just does not fit the image of what the Irish want to be portrayed. They don't want to be portrayed as thugs. They don't want to be portrayed as maybe even right-wing people to a certain degree, right? Well, here's the thing with Conor McGregor. He causes a lot of controversy, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that he's always wrong about certain subjects. Is it wrong for a person to be very wary of the fact that you have somebody living in Ireland for 10 years and out of nowhere he ends up stabbing somebody while after this country, this kind country of Ireland, looks after them? Now, here's a question that I want to leave off with this. Does it matter that this man was an immigrant for 10 years and never contributed to Ireland? If so, what does that have to do with him randomly killing this woman? And number two, what is the ideological drive behind this killing? Because this woman doesn't seem to have any issues with anybody, doesn't seem to be a gangster, doesn't seem to be a political figure or a military personnel of any kind. This is an innocent civilian. So what is going on? But more importantly, what is the motivation behind all this, but more importantly, what is the motivation of the Irish people for them to cause this type of riot and this type of chaos? Was it a long time coming, or was it just this one particular incident that made them think, you know what, we're not going to stand for this? One is too many, and we're just not going to allow it again? Or was it something that has always been happening and has always been a serious problem to where it's just became a boiled over problem now? But either way, like and subscribe. I hope you guys love the content. This is the most that I could really bring out as far as information and as far as comparisons of what this particular incident can bring in terms of news and the coverage and everything around it. But either way, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for all those that been watching the lives, been watching the videos. Don't forget to tell a friend, and hope you guys enjoy. Hopefully I can come back with some more updates on this particular matter at hand. But for now, this is what we have in terms of the coverage that is going on with Conor McGregor and his issues with the Irish government. What does all this mean leading up to his potential fight in UFC 300? Also, what do any of these mean for Ian Garry going into UFC 296? Why is this important? By the way, this is the second part that I want to mention in terms of Ian Garry and why it's important to bring up Ian Garry in this particular matter. Ian Garry, as you know right now, the little scandal that he has going on with people calling his wife a gold digger and this and that, and then the fact that he took the last name of his wife's ex-husband, who, by the way, is their live-in roommate and is also his nutritionist, which to a lot of people really seems strange, but to the mind of Ian Garry seems normal because only he's the one that's in that relationship to really understand what is going on. But in the eyes and how it looks to other people, obviously it's just not going to look good. And you add to the fact that the mixed martial arts community is, for better or worse, toxic, right? Toxic for better, because sometimes you do need a bit of a gut reality check when it comes to certain subjects, when certain things are going on unchecked, right? Like, for example, certain scandals that fans are going to be outraged by and then are going to protest and make a big fuss about it to create some change, whether it would be matchup or cultural practices within the community. Okay, that's the better part of that toxicity. The worst part of that toxicity is people jumping into conclusions. They may not know what's going on. Now, for me, I can really honestly tell you, as a Muslim man, it is quite strange for me to see a man like Ian Garry change his last name, okay, based on the fact that, well, he is the man. And even in the Islamic context of Orthodox practices, the woman isn't even allowed to change her last name because guess what? According to Islamic theology, the woman is not part of the lineage of the man that she's marrying. So it makes no sense for her to change her last name. But either way, men are never going to change their last name in the Muslim community, which makes the Ian Garry situation a lot worse. So why is it important to bring up Ian Garry in this particular question with Conor McGregor and this quote-unquote right-wing uprising? Well, because Ian Garry, if you noticed, seems to have grown up in a very upper middle class liberal Irish family, unlike Conor McGregor, who grew up a little bit hard in the rough parts of Dublin, whereas Ian Garry grew up in the richer parts of Dublin. For make of that as you will. But it affects a person's personality, it affects their worldview and how they see things. But also, with Conor McGregor, another thing to really understand in the light of that concept is, as you get older, your views start to change. When you get a little bit of money, your choices become different. Your outlook of the world, especially when you have children and the overprotective nature that you have as a father, you're going to lean a certain direction, whether that would be politically, religiously, or a certain creed or ethos that you want to live by. And this is just what we're seeing right now. So the fact that Conor McGregor wants to run for president, wants to run for prime minister. Well, I got to tell you, that does affect the entire reasoning behind the Irish government and how they're going to charge him, on top of the fact of how they're going to rearrange laws around this particular incident and how they're going to deal and punish people that they need to punish based on, let's say, chaos control. Now, let's move on to another particular person that sort of fills into this whole gap of this story with quote unquote right wing rising in Europe. How about Tommy Robinson? Recently, he was arrested during a protest in London because obviously this man has always been part of protests with nationalists versus the Islamists. Now it's Palestinian supporters versus nationalists. But obviously, as you guys know, Tommy Robinson was kicked out of the EDL by neo-Nazis that infiltrated the group. A group, by the way, that he created himself only for him to get kicked out of his own party. But that's neither here or there. So he gets arrested in recent times, and I got to tell you, it's quite strange considering that, well, Tommy Robinson was going to do a podcast with none other than his old-time friend, Andrew Tate, who, by the way, till this day, from the years that I've known Tommy Robinson, it's really strange to see that this guy grew up with Andrew Tate, and they actually know each other. They've actually trained in the same gym that Andrew Tate has trained out of for him to win his championships in the kickboxing world. But either way, what's interesting too about this, right, is the fact that what's interesting about this also is the fact that Tommy Robinson was arrested just before he was going to do a podcast with Andrew Tate. Now, why is that significant? I'm going to tell you why. Because the UK and Ireland, just like what I had mentioned earlier, does not want to deal with a riot, with chaos. And can you imagine if Andrew Tate either converts Tommy Robinson or he somehow gets him on his side without really converting to Islam, but yet gets him on his side on the political side of things, which, by the way, is already happening because you see Tommy Robinson work with other Muslims when it comes to tackling, let's say, child grooming situations, or let's say child molestations, or unlawful graping of some sort, right? So this is something we have to try to understand, right? Now, if he was to meet with him and influence him in any kind of way, whether it would be to the point where he converts him to Islam or whether it would be to the point where, let's say, he just brings him onto his side, it's a big problem for the UK government, and they can't allow it because guess what? They have a lot of economic problems going on. The budget that they would have to deal with in terms of having to pay cops and riot gears and things of that nature is just going to be very exponentially dangerous for their economy and their response to, let's say, the chaos that can possibly ensue as a result. So this is what is going on. This is literally what is going on. And again, I could be wrong. This is my own subjective opinion. Of course, these are subjective opinions with basis of understanding certain baselines of how these governments operate, as opposed to, let's say, the United States. So this is all that I really have for this particular subject. I can't really think of anything else that I could add to this particular matter at hand. But so far, this is what we got as a recap from the 25 minutes that I've been talking. So Conor McGregor possibly being investigated for incitement, okay? Plans on running for office in Ireland. Big problem, because now Ireland wants to create new laws to, let's say, hamper down on whatever momentum he has going on inciting, let's say, whether it's the right wing or just normal Irish citizens that have concerns for these unlawful killings. But either way, they want to do something in terms of damage control, in terms of, let's say, chaos control, and they also want to put out the fire before it can inflame into a bigger mess that they can't put out. So that's one. And then also, two, how does this relate with Ian Gary? Obviously, Ian Gary is probably going to be seen as, let's say, a less of a man, somebody who's sort of a wimp, somebody who's not within the ethos of the red pill community in that kind of context. So relating all of that, how is this going to affect him and this particular distraction going into UFC 296, where he has taken on an extremely violent opponent such as Vicente Luque? So all of these things sort of correlate into that. And then I brought up Tommy Robinson based on the fact that he got arrested just before he was going to do a podcast with Andrew Tate. And what that's going to come out of that, well, possible influence. So let's talk about the fact that, let's say, if Tommy Robinson was to even become a Muslim. By the way, that's not far-fetched. I know that a lot of people say Tommy Robinson is the number one enemy of Islam, the number one proponent against its ideology or its way of life in any kind of way. I understand that. However, you got to understand, in Islamic history, this would not be unusual or something out of the blue, because some of the greatest warriors in Islam, Khalid bin Walid, was one of the biggest opponents for Islam, spoke out against it. Sound familiar? Went against all Muslim figures, fought against Islam. Sound familiar? Because this is Tommy Robinson in a nutshell. And then all of a sudden became one of the biggest leaders in the Muslim world after becoming one of its greatest conquerors to have ever lived in the entire history of Islamic military campaigns. So that is something to think about. This is my 30 minutes that I had offered to you guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to share, like, tell a friend to tell a friend, and also continue to watch all the way until the end. Thank you so much for giving this time and effort to listen to this particular content. And I hope in the future I can drop more hot content for you guys in order for you guys to get an objective point of view of understanding mixed martial arts news, of taking a look at different perspectives, not just my own, but also entertaining you with my own opinions while also giving you the subjective facts. The objective facts, as well as my own subjective opinions, and also labeling it as such, which is an important matter that a lot of people don't do. They do not label anything that they say. In other words, they'll say, well, this is what I feel about the situation, but it's a matter of fact. But it's not a matter of fact. It's your own opinion. This is a difference between me, and this is a difference between other content creators. They want to entertain you with their own opinions. I can do that as well. But I also want to educate you with objective facts. And I think that is the most valuable thing that you can take from content, whether it's MMA, whether it's current events, whether it's other sports, or whether it's talk radio of any kind. But either way, for this particular channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. Eventuality that at some point Dana White is going to leave the UFC. However, that is not what is happening right now. In recent times and in recent news, there have been speculations that Dana White was going to leave the UFC and perhaps maybe give the position to somebody that is equally qualified, such as maybe Hunter Campbell. Some names have been mentioned, such as Chael Sonnen and Daniel Cormier, which Dana White shot down previously with claiming those particular names in the past, but in the recent times have also shot down the idea that he is going to leave the UFC at any particular given time. Now, why is it that it's important for Dana White to be part of the UFC? For one, you got to understand that with Dana White, he is in a position where he is the staple of the company. Let's just be honest about it. Dana White is bigger than most of the fighters that are involved in mixed martial arts, and in particular, the organization and the roster of the UFC. So with that in mind, what you have is somebody that brings stability to the brand, somebody that can be looked at and said, you know what, this man is somebody that is familiar to a brand that we want to consume on a weekly basis. He is the guy that speaks at the press conference. He is the guy that speaks at, let's say, just random media outlets for the UFC to try to promote a fight or try to promote a brand in any kind of way. Slap fighting comes to mind with the other extended brands that they are trying to push in that particular organization. But nonetheless, Dana White isn't going anywhere. And the fact that you could even fathom an idea of a UFC without Dana White, I think is really an alienable concept at this particular point. Now, why do I say that? Dana White has been the guy that has been running the UFC in terms of contract negotiations, in terms of understanding, let's say, the small details to the shows, the production. This is something that's not often talked about. Also, here's another thing that I think is very underrated about Dana White that a lot of people don't take into consideration, which is this. He has all right. So if you guys are staying tuned, thank you. I want you to guys to take a look at that last video that I did talking about why Dana White is a staple of the UFC in response to all the speculations of Dana White potentially going into retirement and then being replaced by a predecessor, which is not the case. I went on to explain why Dana White is the staple of the entire company, and there is nobody that is bigger than Dana White, which, by the way, brings us back to this example that we are asking tonight in the main event question of it all. Because if you guys have known, I was doing the 2023 greatest fights of MMA and boxing, and in particular in the UFC, right? Well, the main event of tonight is Conor McGregor, and analyzing why he is not fighting. And we have plenty of reasons and speculations as to why. We went through the first six of them all, first five. Okay. And you can even take a look at the uh, description section below. It'll literally tell you what we had talked about within that order. Number one, the UFC may not be able to afford them. And we mentioned that Sean O'Malley is credited by saying this. Number two, the UFC behind the scenes may know about his alleged drug habits. So why is that important? Because the UFC, if they know that Conor is on a drunk and a cocaine binge, hanging out in the Anthony Joshua fights, going into Day of Reckoning, breaking into the evidence room to snort a few cokes to go into a boxing match. You got to understand, man, with a guy like that, if you are a CEO of a company, you think to yourself, this is supposed to be the guy that is almost bigger than the brand. And they are willing to work with him. But now at this point, with the point of everything that I'm trying to make is that nobody can be bigger than Dana White, and nobody should be bigger than the UFC in the accordance mindset of the executives. And why am I saying that? Because if they were to allow Conor McGregor to be too big, it would be very difficult to control him. And the harder that it is to control Conor McGregor, the harder it is for your company to have a leverage. So, what is business? And by the way, Jesse on Fire credits in this particular reference says that business is like strategy and warfare. So, in other words, he views it as like combat sports, mixed martial arts way of thinking. In other words, we're going to approach it in a certain manner that is tactical, in a certain manner that is methodical, right? We're not going to jump into conclusions and play the short game, but rather play the long term game. And what exactly is a long term game, ladies and gentlemen? You know what it is? The long term game is for the UFC to always be a bigger name than the entire roster or the particular individual, whether that would be Conor McGregor, John Jones, Jorge Masvidal, and Islam Makhachev, Khabib. None of those guys are allowed to be bigger than the UFC. And by the way, that is a reason why you look at the screen right now. What is the most attractive thing in your eye? I guarantee you it's not Conor McGregor laying there in the cage, okay, with a blue light behind you. You know what that blue light looks like? It looks like one of those lights that you see when you leave your television smart screen too long because you left it idle. And then there's just this random screen there with the cities that are passing by you in this still motion frame of pictures that's moving in this particular direction where you're seeing like a rows of cities or a rows of references to certain movies or aliens and robotic figures and whatnot. So you guys know exactly what I mean, right? That's the reality of what you're looking at right here. And then, of course, the 2024 and the 2023 may seem the most insignificant because guess what? The dominant color is red in this particular picture right here, which means that it dominates your eyes. Okay. I'm telling you, there's a psychology when it comes to colors. That's why when you ask psychologists and gang experts, they say that the reason why the Bloods seem to have more of a violent reputation, let's say that of the Crips. And again, we're talking in generalization, right? But again, you got to understand, not to stereotype, but if you're part of one gang or the other, you're going to have the same mannerisms as the members of that gang. Like, for example, with the Crips, they will never say the B word of any kind, right? The same thing with the Bloods. For example, that's why you see Suge Knight with a shirt that says Bompton. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's Compton, but spelled with a B because we're Crips. We're not going to spell anything with a C because of our defiance to the point that, and again, they follow these generalizations. So that is a generalization that I'm making, is that when you are a Blood, psychologically speaking, it seems that you are probably prone to a higher propensity of violence in such a dramatic fashion. In other words, maybe shooting someone may not be enough. Maybe using, a knife of some sort or whatever. Again, I'm just trying to be careful about what I'm trying to say, but I'm simply just speaking for entertainment purposes and for training and educational purposes as well, right? But like, yeah, I just wanted to put that disclaimer there. But nonetheless, when you're a Blood, yeah, why do you seem more violent? Because of the red colors. Now, the blue, you look at the blue in generalization of things, you take a look at somebody like Warren G. This guy is literally the most chillest guy that you will ever meet. Very laid back. Yeah, everything is cool. Everything is chilling. Everything is fine. Snoop Dogg, he's the same way. Yeah, nephew, you know how we do. Yeah, like just everything about him is just very chill, very laid back. You know how we do with the SNOOP. You know how that is. That's how a lot of Crip members are. They're all very chill guys. I will say, I'll tell you this, right? And this is what's great that we're sort of going into a different direction in this conversation just to talk about different things. But to add on to that generalization of the Bloods having a higher propensity for violence and the Crips being a lot more of a very chill and laid back type of people, I'll tell you, I did meet a Crip back in the days in 2009 here in Sacramento, and then he was also living in Stockton at the time, right? I think the brother's name was Asa, right? He was an LA dude. I think he was from Slauson, so basically the same hood from where Nipsey Hussle came from, right? So he was a very chill and laid back guy. He did definitely fit that same description and that same generalization as to those of the Bloods. I'm sorry, of those of the Crips that are very laid back. And then as with the Bloods, well, they're very violent. A lot of the guys that I knew growing up that were part of that, and again, I don't want to, name names on that one because that particular name is just somebody that's, I guess, okay with putting their names out there. But yeah, nonetheless, the Bloods that I knew in New Jersey and in the New York State area, they were very violent, right? In ways that I can't even describe to you their rap sheet in a current moment of time. But yeah, nonetheless, that's the reality of what I'm trying to say in long tangent of things. The UFC will always be bigger than Conor McGregor because they just have a certain brand supremacy in order to suppress those that are trying to rise up to the top. Because the ones that rise up to the top, like Conor McGregor right now, are giving them very bad leverage problems. You want to know why they're giving them very bad leverage problems? I want you to take a look at this and put it in context, okay? The Saudis were talking to Conor McGregor at the Day of the Reckoning card. Do you think that the Saudis could midget the paycheck that Conor McGregor got from the Floyd fight? And again, that's not a midget check at all, right? Like the way Conor says it best. It is, me super heavyweight is me weight class in my checks, mate. Me super heavyweight in my wallet, yeah. That's Conor McGregor's attitude about it in a nutshell, right? It's super heavyweight. But I don't know what you would say for the Saudis' paycheck. It would be what? Diamond super heavyweight slash extra heavyweight weight class wallet sized paycheck? Perhaps. That's a very good chance. There's some good chances and realities of that. However, the UFC will never be able to match what the Saudis are going to be able to give to them. Or maybe the Saudis are going to try to play nice and leave him alone because let's be honest, right? What could the Saudis pay Conor McGregor for? That Manny Pacquiao fight. The problem is Manny Pacquiao is already tied to fighting Bukaw, the longtime Muay Thai world champion, world renowned Muay Thai fighter Bukaw, fighting Manny Pacquiao, but in a boxing ring. I think Manny Pacquiao is probably going to try and just coast through and try to hit him with some shots, but not really. But then at the same time, I could also picture Bukaw personally just probably catching him. Wow. Okay. Come to think of it, there's some interesting things that you could look forward to in that fight. I don't really know much about Bukow's hands, to be quite honest with you, because every fight that I've seen out of this guy, he would just teep kick you and then low kick you. That's the Thai special, is the teep kick, which is great to really gauge the distance. And sometimes if you really push them hard enough, you can really push kick them all the way up to the cage, right? And then the low kicks with the ties, that's all that they have is the low kick, not the ties in generalization, in but with Bukaw in particular, that's all that he has is just teep kicks and low kicks, and that's it. So what else? Yeah, these are the reasons why Conor McGregor is not able to fight in the UFC because they have some leverage issues. They have leverage issues to the point where the UFC is thinking to themselves, Are we going to pay this guy a whole lot of money just for him to go and mess it up with Blow? On top of the fact that we can't even match the offers that he's getting out there in the free agency marketing. Well, what does that mean? Well, in the free agency marketing, what Conor McGregor has going on is that he has 2 fights left with the UFC. Oh. So what was that thing that I was just telling you guys about earlier that Jesse on Fire said about business and strategy? The UFC right now is plotting. They plotting. Just like what Hassan Campbell used to say. They plotting so they can hit him in the head with a headshot and rock his snot box. Yeah. But nonetheless, that's the reality of Conor McGregor's contract negotiations right now. The UFC is plotting and looking and setting their sights, thinking to themselves, he's got 2 fights left. This is what we have going on. He's getting old. He's getting really past his prime. He may look like he's getting slower. This is a problem. And he has 2 fights left. So how are we going to match him up? Okay. If I was a UFC right now and I'm going to make a decision right then and there, I'm Dana White or I'm the new Dana White. This is what I'm going to do. Let's give Conor a tune-up fight right now. Tune-up fight. Who would that be? Nate Diaz. Would Nate Diaz do good numbers with Conor McGregor? Perhaps. All right. That first fight, is it enough for us to, let's say, pay him $20 million in order to fight Nate Diaz, who's also sort of over the hill? But at the same time, we can also say that he can give him a good fight, just like they gave each other a good fight in the second time around. The first fight around, obviously, Nate clipped him, choked him out, was what it was. And of course, Conor being the star and the ace side of things, they gave him a rematch only for Conor to strategize and find a formula that would work against Diaz, which was what? Leg kicks and then outbox him while leading with the leg kicks. And Conor did exactly that. I even cited earlier of that night that when Chris Avila fought Artem Lobov, I knew that as soon as Artem Lobov was throwing leg kicks at Chris Avila and just really setting it up with punches and 1-2s and jabs to follow it with those low kicks, I knew that Conor McGregor was going to do the same thing because guess what? Conor and Artem were part of that same training camp going into that UFC 202 August 2016 card, the rematch they had from the previous fight in March of 2016. And that was Conor McGregor's greatest fights ever. And it was also awesome to watch. But shout outs to my accountant who was watching that fight with me. Yeah, he knows who he is when I mean by accountant. But yeah, nonetheless, either way, Conor McGregor, here's an interesting thing about him too, right? There's a lot of rumors that circulate and say that Conor McGregor had joined the Irish mob, which, by the way, takes this whole conversation into a whole nother territory, right? It seems that Conor McGregor bought his way into the Irish cartel, right? Basically bought his power into that particular organization. Now, Chris Brown is a pop star, right? He's not just any R&B singer. You know what I mean? He's not just any like mixtape famous rapper. He is Chris Brown, the biggest star or one of the biggest singers in the world. What does that mean? That means that, well, Is that enough for you? Maybe not. Well, why not? Okay. I'm Chris Brown. I'm going to go join the street gang named as the Bloods. Yes, me as Chris Brown, I'm going to join the Bloods. And why are you going to do that? One critic may ask. Well, Chris Brown is just simply going to say the same thing that Conor McGregor would say, is that you not only want to be the best fighter in the ring, and by the way, he's already proven that, and he's got the money to do it, but now you also want to have that attachment to your pride and your ego as being one of the most dangerous men on earth. Let's just be honest. Men want to be known as dangerous, don't you? Well, some don't, some do, but that's the dilemma that Conor McGregor has to deal with in his life. That's the dilemma that Chris Brown has to deal with in his life. But either way, don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you guys enjoyed the content. And I'm going to leave you guys with the video that I did with the Dana White release that I did earlier. Dana White is a staple of the UFC brand. I'm going to continue playing from where it left off. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys soon. Has a strong insight in understanding the inevitable chaos that is about to ensue. And why do I say that? Let's go back to UFC 229. By the way, a particular event that I constantly go back and reference in this particular content, in this particular video and a particular channel at that. Why? Because it is one of those situations that I think can be used as a case study for future mixed martial arts promotions, and in particular the UFC. Because Dana White knew that he was not going to put the belt around Khabib at the time where they knew that chaos was going to ensue because of the fact that Khabib jumped over the fence, tried to fight the corner of Conor McGregor, in particular Dylan Dennis, and the rest of his coaches. It became somewhat of a problematic event in terms of what could happen if they were to put a belt around Khabib. Dana White had the insight to recognize that if he puts the belt right here in front of everybody, that it was going to go wrong and everybody was just going to start off and kick off a riot. They kicked off a riot anyway. You could even look at some of the videos they've had in MMAfighting.com back in UFC 229, when you had Khabib supporters fighting Irish supporters, in particular the ones that came there for Conor McGregor. One guy got knocked out, and on top of that, he fell right on his head in a concrete floor. Now, obviously, he was all right, but the way that he was fighting, he didn't look like he was very serious. But a lot of these Khabib supporters, they looked very serious. A lot of them were a mixture of Russian and Dagestani, Eastern European, and Muslim guys, which would encompass maybe Black Muslims, Pakistani Muslims, Arab Muslims, along with these other Eastern Europeans and Chechens and other Muslim groups that were be inevitable at an event like that, with the promotion it had going on, with the dolly and the bus, with Dylan Dennis egging on the situation. Absolutely. Absolutely, he had a great insight. And this is something that you can never take away from Dana White. Dana White is the type of guy that has great social intelligence. And this is the reason why he is where he's at. You know, another thing about Dana White that you really need to know is that he is a hero to a lot of people that make it as a big time CEO that don't have a college degree. Mark Zuckerberg is in that list. Yes, Mark Zuckerberg had gone to Harvard but did not complete. So therefore, he's not really a college graduate in the technical sense of it all. Dana White had no experience in college at all, never went to a university or anything like that. He was just a guy that knew certain people in powerful positions, because guess what? He was the type of guy that everybody wanted to be around. He's the type of guy that sort of has this crossover between a Suge Knight type of figure and a little bit of a Mark Zuckerberg. Now, obviously, Mark Zuckerberg is way wealthier. He has a bigger company and this and that. But the energy is all the same in the way that I'm trying to convey this message and make you understand who Dana White is. On top of that, here's another Dana White moment that I think is really important for people to ponder upon. This guy got kicked out of the Hard Rock Hotel casino because he was beating the dealers in blackjack by the millions. And again, I'm not a gambling man. In Islam, it's haram to gamble. But one thing that you have to take into consideration is the intelligence of Dana White being able to beat a system like this that has gone on for years and years and decades into basically taking people's money. And now he became such a threat to this particular casino that he was taking millions from them because he's a genius. He is somebody that has a certain IQ that you cannot teach. And this is a reason why he has high social intelligence to get in with the Fertitta brothers as he did early on. And quite frankly, to even manipulate these guys into spending their money investing in this sport that Dana White truly believed in. So not only is he one of the most luckiest men on earth, but he's also the most socially intelligent men on earth. And that particular situation with the Hard Rock and Casino is a great example of that. And guess what? Guess what happened in the midst of that? The UFC got kicked out of the Hard Rock Casino, and they never had fight nights there ever since. You talk about the Apex Center that is currently present in the UFC stratosphere right now, right? The Hard Rock Casino was the fight nights for UFC at the time, and I think even Chris Leben and Anderson Silva had fought in that platform. But nonetheless, one thing that I got to tell you guys within this whole 8-minute rant about Dana White and his history and everything that I could fit in this short amount of time, I got to tell you that he's not going anywhere. He's going to stay as the president of the UFC. And not only that, this is a guy that champions freedom of speech. You look at all the things that he had allowed over the years, the list that could go on. Colby Covington, speaking of Leon Edwards' dead father, is one of them. Among the other antics with Conor McGregor leading up to the Khabib fight. And then the list goes on and on and on with the things that these guys say to each other that he allows because he champions it. He even allowed Bud Light into the mix of the UFC, even though they have a different ethos than the dominant red pill, right-wing Muslim fan base of the UFC. And regardless of that, it's what he did. It's what he tried to execute in terms of trying to really show the true meaning of inclusiveness in terms of the modern world that we live in which we have different interpretations of what inclusiveness really means. But nonetheless, that is my 10 minutes that I have. Don't forget to like and subscribe, share, tell a friend to tell a friend, and look at all the videos that I have. And don't forget to watch till the end because there's some gems that I have in terms of the explanations and the storylines that I can convey to you guys, among basically teaching you guys about mixed martial arts as a technique, not only as a technique, but also as a lifestyle, but also as a business and everything else in between. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Later. All right. So I gotta tell you, I'm just gonna continue on from here. Here's something that I really want to share that I think is quite fascinatingly interesting, right? I think that people are underestimating how this could end tragic for Conor McGregor, right? And I hate to say it, but at some point you have to be very humble about your mortality. And I think that the more successful you are in this world, it becomes very difficult to sort of understand that. So when that becomes difficult to understand, you sort of lose track in a lot of things. And this is the reason why Conor McGregor has fallen into what he has fallen into. Do you guys remember what Conor McGregor looked like back in the days? How he looked was just absolutely insane, right? Conor McGregor's movements back in the days were phenomenal. You can tell that he was very hungry. You can tell that he worked a lot on his athleticism. If you remember, he had a movement coach, that guy, Edio Portillo of some sort, right? Um, if you look at back in the days, man, I don't know. I don't know if I want to play this video. It's probably not a good idea, but anyways, look up Edo Portillo back in the days, right? And you look at him, in the way that he moved, Conor McGregor, he was just very okay, let's just show you real quick. Let's I'm sure it's not really going to affect it if I show you like maybe 5 seconds of it, or maybe just to kind of react to it. So we'll play it with no volume, obviously. But here we go. So Conor McGregor 8 years ago, you take a look at his movement. It was very fluid, right? Very smooth. You can tell that he was just very in sync with everything around him, how his environment was. He was very aware, right? And not only that, I think having the hunger also has something to do with it, right? Being able to learn these types of movements, being able to pattern your mind into understanding complex situations requires you to have your optimal state of arousal in order for you to perform at your highest peak. And right now, it's very difficult for him to have that because the motivation that you have to ask yourself is, what is there? There is a quit. Look, I'm going to tell you guys something. There is something beautiful about knowing that you have no other choice but to get in here and to make it, which really drives you to the other side. It drives you to the point where you become this person that will not give up because this is all that you have. In other words, like let's say if you're a person that has to use the bus or something like that, right? You have to get to a job interview. Well, how are you going to get there? Well, okay, you can't miss it. You can't not make it on time. You have to be there, but you have this obstacle of trying to make a schedule with a bus. So, what do? You do what it takes to get there, right? In other words, let's say you're missing the bus, you would knock on the bus to try to get yourself on if, let's say, they were about to leave without you, right? Because you had to make it to that interview. Now, fast forward to, let's say, a person that doesn't have to go to interviews or jobs like that. What kind of motivation would you have if you've already been a CEO? You've already had your position, you've already had your thing where, as opposed to the person that has this, particular drive. That's kind of where Conor McGregor is at in the metaphorical sense of it all. He is at a point of his life where his motivation is at his low. And even though he will tell you different, because that is the bravado that we provide in the mixed martial arts world, the reality is that he knows he is finished, but he has to keep this up. So, the other part of this particular content in this particular live stream was predicated on the fact that his contract negotiations with the UFC was because of the fact that the UFC had these other variations and possibilities that they didn't want to entertain, such as waste their money and investment on a return that they can't get out of Conor McGregor, like what I had mentioned with the Sean O'Malley allegation. Um, or maybe they just wanted to save face as the UFC and not allow a fighter to be bigger than their brand. So either way, it's not looking good for Conor McGregor in his mental health because he's not competing. This is what he loves to do. They are taking it away from him. So if he's not competing, guess what? His mind is, hey, you know what? I'm going to Ibiza for a week. They're going to do blow. Why not? That's his mindset because now you've taken the motivation away from him. Now, you look at Khabib, you want to talk about motivation being taken away from one person to the other. You got to remember this. Khabib was in this particular mindset where, you know what? If they're not going to give me the title shot, I'll wait it out or I'll earn my way back up. But either way, that's where he's at with that. He's going to continue on fighting. He's going to continue on training in the midst of that and continue to live a lifestyle that is a lot more healthier because you look at Khabib, he doesn't do drugs, he doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink, he doesn't hang out with pop stars, he doesn't hang out with, well, he does hang out with sheikhs and world leaders, but that's the extent of it. Other than that, he doesn't hang out in clubs or mingle with the stars or anything like that. Not unless he is in a football match where he goes to Trafford in Manchester or in Etihad Stadium in Manchester City or wherever, or Liverpool, whichever team that he visits. I know he's a Real Madrid fan, but nonetheless, that's not Khabib. He likes to just train and, yeah, occasionally hang out with football stars. But other than that, he lives a very disciplined life. And you can't demand that out of Conor McGregor if Conor McGregor is not fighting. So, in the midst of that, what becomes the bigger problem and the bigger issue of it all? Conor McGregor is stuck doing drugs, doing vices that he would otherwise stay away from if he had a training camp. Because once again, you can't expect him to be like Khabib. So again, why would this end tragic? I literally was about to leave the show off at 1 hour and 30-minute mark until I realized, wait a minute, I didn't really talk about what was tragic. And of course, I played my videos in between, but I never talked about why this would end tragic. And guess what? You've seen it out of Tupac Shakur. You've seen it out of James Dean. You've unfortunately seen it with Princess Diana. You've seen it with Kurt Cobain. And you've seen it with Mac Miller. You've seen it with Pop Smoke. You've seen it with King Von. The names that I could go on and on in the pop culture rap world and even the sports world and everything in between is just enormous in its pool size of data and example. But nonetheless, what do all those have in common in the names that I just mentioned? Not much. A lot of them were gang related. A lot of them were accident. Very few of them I had mentioned were of old age or anything like that. Aha. Okay. Which tells you what? One of the things that we have to be very humble about in life is to understand that at any day we can go. And that is the ultimate price that we all have to pay at some point, not now in the present, maybe in the present, if let's say your life was extremely threatened to the highest degree that you had a response in a very tactical and violent way. Okay, yeah. But other than that, this is the reality that we have with Conor McGregor is that it could end at any time. And by the way, when I say it could end at any time, I'm speaking in three different forms. right? And not all of them in any particular order or in any type of chronological order in any kind of way. It's just this. It's like it could end his career based on the drugs that he does. It could also end his life with the drugs that he does, with the people that he mingles, and then also take into consideration what I just said earlier in the content about his Irish mob affiliations. So I urge you guys to watch this particular content from start to the beginning, because I dropped some gems with some information in between that I think you guys, as mixed martial arts fans and global uh, current events, news, history buffs, would really enjoy as well. When I talked about Conor McGregor's possible involvement with the Irish government and also with his particular interest to politics in Ireland. Again, those are also realities. So let's not make this all into the ever doom and gloom of things and just end it with a tragic Shakespearean Romeo and Juliet scenario. But let's really understand that it could end positively. But if you look at his current trajectory, that's just not what it seems. Because the longer that he's being put out of a fight, the more that he has chances to go to celebrity parties, to go to Ibiza, Spain, to do cocaine, to be in New York, to be in LA, and then on top of that, involved with the Irish mob in Dublin, getting into it with random people. And then there's videos of him showing up at a random house party in Liverpool. And then waking up with the wrong person in bed. Yeah, that's some of the few scandals that Conor McGregor has to deal with. But once again, it can all end in a very tragic way, because unfortunately, he really is the type of person that needs to have, let's say, a camp or a fight in order for him to stay disciplined. Even with Khabib, he doesn't need all of that. He doesn't need a fight to get him disciplined. Not even George St. Pierre. You look at George St. Pierre, that guy's whole MO was just to basically train no matter what. But with Conor McGregor, his hunger right here 8 years ago was based on nothing more than just desire to become world champion prior to UFC 194 when he took on Jose Aldo for that 13-second knockout. Of course, a lot of that was also predicated on the fact that he was taunting him to the point where Jose Aldo had decided to charge forward and get clipped, which eventually created the biggest highlight knockout in the whole entire world. And not only that, it's wow. Wow. But nonetheless, I think we'll call it a day from there. I'm gonna basically just ride this out till the last 2 hours or so. So I'll probably play a video from Canelo versus David Benavidez early prediction for all my boxing heads. I'm gonna play this as we outro to the show. Why I'm playing this? This was done a month ago. And you know what? I made a great investment in this one, right? Because this was a content to where basically David Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez have yet to fight and haven't even signed. And David Benavidez was just fresh off of his fight. Canelo Alvarez was also fresh off of his fight. And here we are just a month later. Man, it's like 900 views since then. It was growing. It was kind of slowly growing. It started from just like 50 views, and then all of a sudden, within just less than a few days, it just started growing because I guess it just started growing interest. But here, I'll show you guys this. By the way, there's a part 2 to this, which I believe was on the live portion. I urge you guys to take a look at it. It was attached to one of the UFC coverage that I did. But here's one with Canelo Alvarez versus David Benavidez. By the way, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm going to bring the video outro with this, inshallah. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend. And I'll end it right here with this.
I'll put my money on David. That's all I gotta.
Saying what I said yesterday. Let me see what this is. Somebody said.
All right. So just listening to the world famous boxing voice with none other than Nestor Gibbs. Wanted to give him a shout out because I have called in his show before. So, you got to show love to the channels that show you love and appreciation and whatnot. So now let's talk about the two best 168-pound fighters in the world right now, which is who? None other than Canelo Alvarez and David Benavidez. Now, what's great about this fight? I got to tell you, what is even more awesome other than their accolades, the fact that they are both world champions. Obviously, Canelo is more than just a world champion. He's an undisputed champion. And, well, David Benavidez is literally Tom Aspinall. And if you understand MMA, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The guy is an interim champion, not really a real champion, but nonetheless, a championship belt is a championship belt. And they are on a course right now to collide in front of the world to give us another one of the best boxing matches possibly in that particular division, if not the entire sport. So what is significant about David Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez that I could tell you that no other content creator out there will tell you? They're going to talk to you about the kicks and the punches or the technicalities that come along with this fight. They're going to talk about the range of David Benavidez. They're going to talk about the power of both men and how both of their powers are going to translate against each other. So we understand that. I can talk to you about the technical aspects of that, but I want to talk to you about something that can really get your dopamine high when it comes to understanding both of their history. And I think this is where this particular video shines the most. So when you look at Canelo Alvarez, what do you think of him? One of the things that you think about Canelo Alvarez is that he's a redheaded Mexican. What does that even mean in terms of growing up in Guadalajara, Mexico? What does that mean? I'll tell you what that means. For one, you look different than everybody else. You ever lived in a place where you look different than everybody else? Guess what? You're going to have some static. You're going to have fights in your hand. You're going to have people calling you names. You're going to have people doing this and doing that and everything in between. But guess what? It forged you into a tough competitor, just like David Benavidez. What's significant about him? Well, for one, David Benavidez, I got to tell you, was a former 270-pound fat kid during his teenage years. So why is that significant? This brother has some serious chip on his shoulder. And guess what? Fighters who have the biggest chips on their shoulder are usually some of the most motivated psychopaths that you will ever run across. And I don't mean psychopath in a negative way or in a psychological way, but in a way where you are crazy for the sport and you will literally die for it if need be, right? So that's how I'm describing David Benavidez in this sense. Also, you got to take into consideration, Mike Tyson says that one of his favorite fighters right now is none other than David Benavidez. And what a great way to get some sort of legend's approval of some sort, right? This is what you get out of Mike Tyson. He's approving you as the man that, well, he favors. Just like what he did when he anointed Tyson Fury. He's like, oh man, there's a 6'9" English guy that's named after me, and his dad was a big fan of mine. Same age as his dad. His dad was going through the same things that I was going through during that time frame. He could relate to that. And there was love for that. And then, of course, there's Francis Ngannou. He had to pick Francis Ngannou over Tyson Fury. And rightfully so. You look at the storyline with Francis Ngannou, the struggles that he had gone through, right? With going through different border customs and then having to sneak into France and living homeless and things of that nature. And the story goes on with Francis Ngannou. But nonetheless, it's great having Mike Tyson approve you. But one of the things that motivates Mike Tyson to being such a big David Benavidez supporter is that he looks at him as someone like himself. Now, is Canelo somebody that Mike Tyson can relate to? Maybe. I mean, yes, both of these guys, like any other fighter out there, you grew up fighting, especially if you come from a rough background like Guadalajara, Mexico, or Brooklyn, where Mike Tyson is from, where he's gotten to a lot of street fights as a kid, and it forged him into the man that he is today as somebody that, well, knows how to trash talk, somebody that knows how to roar up a crowd, how to incite an opponent into anger and into hostilities, which creates big entertainment. So that's Mike Tyson for you in a nutshell. But when you look at Canelo Alvarez, he's no different than David Benavidez as somebody that has something to prove. Now, as I was saying earlier, if you're a ginger Mexican with a Celtic background like Canelo Alvarez living in those parts of the world, you know who that's like? You ever seen the movie Blood In, Blood Out? It was about a movie with these Mexican-American gangsters. One kid was half white, and of course he looked different than everybody else, so he got the stick of it all because of, well, he just looked different than everybody else in the gang. But he proved himself as one of the toughest guys in that gang, and lo and behold, a lot of that comes from the motivation of people doubting you, people looking at you different because you are different. Well, David Benavidez, on the other hand, he wasn't a redhead. He didn't stand out of any particular crowd in his neighborhood or anything like that. Of course, unless we're talking about the fact that, yes, he was a former fat kid, and guess what? Those things will really drive you into a different stratosphere, especially if you're the type of person that is spiteful, the type of person that wants to prove the critics wrong, wants to prove others wrong, wants to show that you are not that guy that everybody saw you as when you were a fat teenager. So this is the type of psychology that I think is really important, understanding these two men. Canelo obviously is a bit of a hothead, right? Back in 2015, I got to tell you, I met somebody at a gym, right? I believe it was a Mexican fella, right? He said he was from Guadalajara, Mexico. And by the way, keep in mind, this was around 2015. So what were we looking at around 2015?